I didn't really spend a ton of time talking about errors. I told you guys that there are two different kinds of errors. We have there's a lot of problems with errors in that like they're usually not like superhuman readable. You'd wish they'd be like, you know how errors are in like games and Windows, like you get errors and most of the time they don't really make sense anyway. Well, programming you get a lot of that too. It's gotten a lot better over the years. In fact, Visual Studio 2015 will underscore like with a red squiggly places where the error is, and that hopefully helps a lot more. Back when I started learning, there was no red squiggly. It was just, this is the line number that's on. Good luck, that's where the error is. And you're like going character by character, like what is it that's wrong here? Why does this not work? The only suggestions I could have for you is to look at other examples in like the book and online for like what similar lines of code and compare it like character by character. You'll find where it is. And once you find and fix an error once, I think it'll get easier for you to fix it after that. Yeah.
How do you get the line numbers on the side?
The easiest way to do it is if you go to Visual Studio and up here in the top right, there's like a little search field up here. You type line numbers. And it'll give you a result here of like text editor, all languages, general. You click on that guy, and there's a checkbox right here in the middle that turns on line numbers. That's the easiest way. Yeah, you had a question too.
Yeah, when I was doing the homework, it would create two separate files in the same area. So it was coming up with some weird...
Two separate files in the same area.
Yeah, whenever I saved, it would create like two CDP files and two of every file, and then it wouldn't open. So every time I saved it or rebuilt it, I would have to take those out and delete them. It was weird.
Okay, if you get that again, can you like, you know how to take a screenshot or do the, the Windows clipping tool of the error? I want to see also your Solution Explorer. I want to see. My guess is there's something in your project and how you added the files is a little different. So next time, if you go home and you try it for this week's homework and you get that, just show me like this thing on the right. Like, show me what happens and show me the two files that you have there, and we'll get that ironed out. It's probably something simple. Any other questions about last week's homework? All right, so let's just go over that real quick for posterity.
How do you change the layout?
The layout? What do you mean?
Because just like the dark one and they have the light one.
Uh-huh. Oh, you want to actually change the color scheme? I think there's like a way. Yeah, if you type color in the top right in the search field, like the second option here is color, and then the drop down box here is blue dark. There's not a lot, but you can customize it. You can actually download themes and stuff. Like I've gotten to the point where it barely matters, but you can customize it to be pink or like green, whatever color you want to as well. I would suggest just downloading a theme. There's these things called Visual Studio themes, and they basically pick the fonts, the colors of all the variable names. Instead of like blue, it'll make them like green or whatever you want to, and it'll also color your Visual Studio. It's all customizable, but it's not like
just like the dark color that way.
Yeah, it's a little easier at nighttime too. All right, so the homework question number 1 was kind of more of a word problem than a programming problem. There were 3 different ways you could do a division operation, and each of those 3 things demonstrates how C++ handles dividing numbers. So the question was, what's displayed by each line in the following code snippet? Explain each result. Why is it displaying that result? So the first line is 7 divided by 3 is blah. So the answer there would be 2. It would print out the number 2 without any decimal points. And the reason for that is that those 2 numbers that are being divided are considered integers. You notice that there's no decimal points on either of them, which means that it'll treat them as integer division, which means that the result that you get will also be an integer. It won't be a floating point number. The second and the third ones will both give back a floating point number as a result. So it kind of makes sense for the third one because both of those numbers have decimal points, which means C++ will treat both of those as floating points, which will spit out a floating point number as a result. The second one, yeah.
I just was curious, is there a reason why in programming they use the term floating point instead of decimal point?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think about why that thing is called floating. It's probably like a rule. Like, the variable name bool is by this guy, like his last name was Bool with an E, and that's why they honor him with that. I want to say floating point is for like the actual the numbers on the end are like floating at the end of the decimal point. But you know, I don't know. That's a good question. I think we should. I can look up on that. What's that? DEC? No. There is a C# has a value type called decimal, but it's not actually. It's actually interesting because that type is the largest number that C# can represent. It's what's called a 128-bit value. It represents huge numbers. But yeah, floating point numbers. That's a good question. I'll look that up and I'll find out for you. 7 divided by 3. The second one is only one of those numbers is an integer. The first number is a floating point. So that means that C++ will actually treat the result as a floating point too. So because even though I have an integer in there, it says that you're doing floating point arithmetic. This is kind of simple and seems kind of silly, like, oh, it's, you know, I get it, it's dividing two numbers and it's not super exciting. But like I said last week, this can actually bite you and you can be stuck for like hours wondering why your program doesn't work because you're doing one version of the division versus another. It's good to know that C++ does this like silently. Because it's not all about writing out what the number is there. The reason why this is important is not because what you're showing to the player, like, oh, whether I show that he has 98 health or 98.6 health, that's not really a big difference. The problem comes from when you take the result of this operation, 7 divided by 3, and you put it inside of a variable. And then you use that variable for something else. So let's say you want to calculate how much experience that you got for killing a monster, right? And I have a experience multiplier that I'm applying to you right now because I'm playing Diablo 3 and I was on like a bonus of like killing a bunch of guys. I happen to kill 100 monsters, so my experience bonus is 3.5 right now, right? So I say, oh, I just divide like 10 by 3, or I divide, maybe I divide some other fractional number, like I can take 5 divided by 2, right? So I have like a 2.5 multiplier. The problem is if I do that as integer math, my multiplier is not 2.5, it's 2. Which means the experience that I get is actually wrong in that case. So there's a big difference between like floating point numbers, like 2.5 experience times like 1,000,000 versus 2 times experience times 1,000,000. So that kind of problem like can be there. I bet you Diablo has at least one bug like that caused by this already. Somewhere in their codebase they're doing integer math because like it's pretty common to have this. So I think this is a really important thing to keep in mind as we're doing programming. It's not like we do this once and you'll never see it again. You're going to see this more and more as you do more programming. So, and one of the most common ways is what we call normalizing values. So we were just doing this. I was just doing this on Thursday because I was doing some UI work. One of the most common things you have is you have a screen, right? You have a game that has a screen. It goes from left to right. You want to display something in the middle of that screen, right? So the problem is that the middle of the screen, position-wise, like if I actually draw out a screen, screens represent their data in pixels. You guys know what pixels are. It's like every individual pixel represents a piece of color that can be drawn, right? So like this is X, this is Y. If I write the numbers for the pixels for a normal like HD game, this pixel 0, this pixel, and this is pixel 0 on Y, right? Like a 1080p game. If I want to draw something in the middle of the screen, what pixel is that? Here. 960. What pixel is that above?
940.
Okay. Okay, cool. What if I resize the window though? What if my window is like 0 to 320 and 240? What is the middle of this? 320 by 240 window. I don't know if you guys ever play it. Like Undertale might play on this, or 640 by 40. This is like 160X and 120Y. Those two are both in the middle. These points here, right here, are both in the middle of the screen. So that's a problem because in our game in Overwatch, you can resize the window, you can change the resolution. Basically, you can run in 4K in Overwatch if you want to, if you have a graphics card that's good enough for that. but I want to draw the crosshairs right in the middle of the screen. So how do I figure out where the middle of the screen is? Well, I do what's called a normalization. I take where I want to draw it, and I say, hey, I want to draw it at 0.5, comma 0.5. If this goes from 0 to 1, and this goes from 0 to 1 instead, the center of the screen is 0.5. So how do you get 0.5 from that? You take this number divided by 1920. Right? What is the result of that? 5. And this number divided by 1080. Okay? 0.5. What is 160 over 320 here? 0.5. Right? But what if I wrote out this thing like this? I have no decimal points there. You know what I get here?
1.
0. So I have to make sure that these are floating points. At least one of them is. Otherwise, I will get 0. Okay?
Doesn't matter which one is a floating point?
No. As long as one of them is. In fact, in this case, you will want both. And this is a really common thing to get wrong. You know why? Because pixels, you can't have a half pixel. These are integer values. 960 is usually an integer value. It says, hey, 960 pixels. You don't need decimal points for pixels. So you're like, oh, naively, I'll just divide this by the width of the screen, forgetting to convert one of those things to a floating point. So you know what happens is that always your crosshairs draw down here. You're like, oh, shit, that's right, I forgot. Okay. This is like, this happens, it's not like it happens all the time, but this is something common enough where if you didn't know that C++ was doing this, and you were like, why am I getting 0 here? Why? That should be 0.5. You didn't know that C++ did it, then that's that could cause your hair to get pulled out. Because you just don't understand how the languages work. Right? A lot of other languages don't do this kind of thing. C++ is kind of like, they do what's called implicit conversion. They will implicitly say, hey, this value here, I know that it's 0.5, but you're telling me it's an integer, so I'm just going to give you back an integer instead. All right. Any questions on that one? It's like a weird, simple question, but it goes like deep as far as like why C++ does this kind of stuff and why it's important for games to know the difference. All right. All right, so let's do number 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a review lab exercise. I'm going to go through and have you guys write some code here so I can come around and help you. So I'm going to go ahead and write all this stuff in one file. So the question number 2 is write a program that gets 3 game scores from the user and displays the average. So I'll have an int main. I'll make this thing bigger. You see that? Okay. So it's saying 3 different game scores, which means I need to have 3 different variables. So I'm going to have score 1. Score 3. Okay? And these are game scores. Like this is actually, I'm just going to use the integers here. Notice I'm not putting an end line there. And I'm going to include the necessary. This is all from the homework, so you guys should be pretty familiar with doing this. Score 1, okay? And then I'm going to copy that 3 times. Learning to copy paste is going to be a skill that I think is important to learn because it'll speed up your programming quite a bit. Again, it's not about writing code fast. It's about being able to reuse what you have, kind of like, you know, taking pieces of what's written and duplicating it. Like I noticed a pattern here that I'm going to be asking for score 3 times, so I just copied that line, those 2 lines, and I pasted it twice. And I just changed 1 character. And it's a lot faster than typing every single one out every time because they're all the same, right? And here I could just do score 1 plus score 2 plus score 3 divided by 3. And notice I'm doing integer math here. So it's going to give me an integer result. You guys see that? All right, I'm going to do, I don't know, 1200 1,504. Oh, that's right. So yeah, I don't know if you guys ran into this too. Remember that if you want to stick around afterwards, I always make like a dummy variable here. And I do cin dummy. I call it dummy because it doesn't do anything. It just literally is just there as like a target dummy, and it doesn't have any function. Oh, also don't put it after your return. You guys might have seen that. It's hard programming, like when you can only see like 6 lines of code at a time. A lot of guys, it's funny. Some people like will program. There's a guy Joe Rumsey who's a server engineer. He favors like this, so you can see more lines of code. And it's true. You can read a lot more that way. Okay. All right. So I run this now. Let's try this again. This will be 3rd time's the charm. All right. Average is 934. That seems pretty reasonable. 300, 1204. Okay. So the key is that I do the expression for adding up and averaging right here. Okay. All right, question number 3, write a C++ program that asks for distance in furlongs and converts it to yards. So I'll do it right below this. Oh, I will show you guys how to do multiple files, actually. This is a good opportunity for me to show you how to do separate CPP files. So I have this program that I wrote. It's beautiful. I'm going to save a copy of it because I just happen to, I'm going to make a second one of this. I'm going to call it source 2. And over here, I have this file in my project, and it's actually what's being compiled. I can actually just exclude it from the project, which will basically remove it. And then I can add an existing item, and I can add source 2 here. And now, you got to make sure to double-click on source 2. And now I'm actually editing source 2. You can see what file you're editing by here on the tab. And the reason I did that is it basically creates everything that I need already. Like, it just creates a program that has like all the what we call boilerplate code. It's all the stuff that you have to write every time, so it's a lot easier. So in this case here, write a C++ program that asks for distance in furlongs and converts it to yards. How many furlongs? I'm going to create a furlong integer, and I'll say the number of yards is times 220. I think it was. Okay. Kind of the same thing as the average one. I'm going to say, I don't know, 100 furlongs. Seems about right. Cool. You guys ever try typing like a really big number here? It does not like it. So, you know. There's a maximum number. Like I went over this last week. C++ can't represent like super huge numbers, like represent an infinite number of numbers. So keep that in mind. Okay. If I change these to be a float, though, I can represent a much bigger number. So remember that int and float are different. A float can represent much larger series of numbers than an integer can. So a floating point number can represent, you see it says 2.2 e plus 20. You guys remember e from high school at all? It's like a way of scientific notation, right? That means 2.2 times 10 to the 20th. So that result is. Okay. Write a program that takes a Celsius temperature and displays the equivalent Fahrenheit temperature. So again, I'm going to save this thing as, I'm going to call it source 3. I'm going to exclude this one from the project and add an existing item. You can also drag this on top of source files, but I do it through the window here just to be safe. Okay, and this one's saying enter Celsius value. So in this case, I'm going to use float. Celsius. Okay, and I'll just say the temperature in Fahrenheit is 1.8 times Celsius plus 32. So 1.8 times Celsius plus 32. That's it. So 0 degrees Celsius is 32. Cool, seems good. And then 100 degrees Celsius is 212. Seems legit. And 32, 39.6. All right. See how I got a floating point number there too? Because I'm using floating point here. If I was using integer here, Oh, it will still give me a floating point because this thing is also a floating point. So yeah. Either way, an integer or a floating point is fine. Okay, hour value and minute value display the two numbers in the format shown. Okay, again, I'm going to do file save as. Just because I'm doing save as here to save me time, because I'm going to be using a lot of the same code. Okay. This time I'm going to ask for, I'm going to have two variables, one for hour and one for minute. And these are both going to be integers, like that. Hour, hour. And again, here I'm going to just copy both of these lines. Some tricks, like you're going to learn them. I use home and end probably just as much as I type. If I type home, it takes my cursor to the beginning of the line. End will take me to the end, like this. If I hold down Shift while I'm doing that, it will highlight the line. So I can hold down Shift and highlight, press home. And if I hold down Shift and I press up, it'll highlight the line above it or below it. And it's a lot faster for me than switching hands and going to the mouse. So what I usually do is I start the cursor here, I hold down Shift, I press up once and then home once, and I have both of those lines selected. Right? I hit Control C. I hit down, and I hit paste. And why that's important is I use home, and if you hold on Control while you're using your cursor, you'll actually jump between words. And this is probably the other thing that I use a lot, because jumping between words means that I can go here, hit home, replace this with minute, and then go here and replace, and I can hold down this. Oh, if you hold down Control and select, it'll also select a word like that. And so you can replace that. So notice here, instead of writing this whole thing out again, you get so good, you're just basically at the point where you're replacing these things, only the things that are different, and then I basically wrote the same thing without having to type out this whole thing from start to finish again. All right. Time is currently hour. All right.
If you wanted to say AM or PM, how would you do that?
So that would require you to either ask the user for AM or PM or put it in like military time. Like, because you need to know, like 9:28, do they mean AM or do they mean PM? So you either ask them for like 18, like enter an hour between 0 and 24, or just ask them AM, PM. So if you ask them, I can show you how to do that next too.
Well, I put character AM, PM, and then asked them to put it in, but it wouldn't give me the M, it would just give me A or P.
Oh, I see. Because you're using character, not a string. You need to use a string there. And if you just replace character with string, it'll work for you. 9:28. The time is currently 9:28. All right. So that's the homework. It was a lot of formatting, a lot of combining couts and cins repeatedly and using variables. So we're going to do a little bit of a review exercise today because I want you guys to get a little warmed up for it. So here's my here. Let's see. This should be pretty easy. I want you guys to do 1, 2, and 3 today, right now, so that we can review, and then we'll get into lecture afterwards. So question number 1 is, I just want you guys to write a program that displays the name of your favorite game, its developer and publisher, literally just cout, just something. I want you guys to make sure your Visual Studios are set up, so this is a perfect example. My favorite game happens to be Overwatch, go figure. Write a program that will mimic an RPG is number 2. So this one is, I want you to just type in the number of experience points that the player has, and then spit out what level they are. So in our game, imagine it's like Pokemon or like Final Fantasy. If I typed in 35,400, it should spit out what level I am, without any decimal points after it. Okay? Then the third one is, write a program that takes 4 different review scores for the game Final Fantasy 23 and displays the average. The average should be a floating point number. Okay? Questions? Okay. And try to do these in different files too, so I can help you work through that. I'll give you guys about an hour to do this stuff, and then we'll do the lecture. After you're done with this, you can go on break, and then we'll pick it up. It should take you less than an hour, I think, but we'll see how it goes.